The choice to become a first responder is an exciting one that offers the opportunity to play a critical role in improving our quality of life, protecting our communities, providing safety, saving lives and property. However, there is a cost to first responders, their families, and their social relationships, which is associated with recurrent exposure to traumatic events. Examples include physical exhaustion, exaggerated sense of responsibility, and distancing. Unfortunately, these costs are often overlooked. Studies have shown that over a 6-month time frame, up to 80% of first responders will be exposed to critical incidents.
Because we're seeing stuff on a daily basis that, the day-to-day citizen doesn't see. We're coming in at your worst moment and trying to figure out and how to develop an answer for you or care for you, to make your day better.
There has been quite a few times where I've had trouble sleeping, whether it's just not being able to go to sleep after getting off a shift because your brain is still moving, or when you're trying to go to sleep and all the thoughts just start coming into your head. The way that it works for me is if I can talk about it more, then the thoughts kind of go away and I get to go to sleep.
There's times where you just, after you get off work, and if some bad calls happen or things happen, at least for me, sometimes I just feel discouraged about the way, the shift turned out or the way things happened. And when I get off work, there's been numerous times where it's just I don't want to see anybody or have to do anything. I just want to go home and sleep or be by myself. And
so I can't just go up to him and say, hey, that was a real bad thing about your dad 10 years ago when he committed suicide. I was the officer that was there. I don't know if they need that closure or want that closure or not. All I can do is be there.
Right.
All I can do. All I can do is be in that grocery store aisle, looking at them and running all these memories in my mind of what they looked like that day when that happened.
Secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, burnout, and moral injury are a few of the terms found in the research that define the cost of recurrent and chronic exposure to primary and secondary traumatic events. One of the most profound impacts of trauma exposure is how it changes our view of the world in the following 3 areas: spiritually, which includes meaning and purpose; identity, which includes what is important to us; and beliefs, which includes safety, control, and trust. In the first 72 hours, there are often a number of resources targeted at supporting first responders exposed to sentinel critical incidents. These services are therapeutically beneficial for initial consolidation of the memory and immediate coping. However, many of the symptoms associated with trauma exposure don't surface until well after the event occurred. Furthermore, some calls may not initially be identified as critical incident.
I think peer support is definitely something that our organization has been promoting and trying to make the steps to move towards and move forward with. We recognize it that it could be beneficial and something that would be very good for our department. Unfortunately, I feel like I don't know if the reason is there's still some stigma behind it or what, but I feel like it's underutilized in a lot of ways.
Well, I think when we're discussing anything, we need to go back at where we were. And back in the day, 20-some years ago, where we were was this. When an officer had a traumatic situation, you went up to that officer and you said, "Are you okay?" And 20 years ago, that person said, "Yep, I'm fine." And it was done. That can't happen anymore. Because we know too much now. We know that that person's not okay. We know that this stuff affects that person in a way that some of us can't understand it, and especially they can't understand it.
And so I feel like the win is that he calls me. When he doesn't call me, that's when I'm concerned. I've had extreme cases where you say, yep, it's just time to get in the car, we're going to get you some, get you with somebody that can talk you through this. And another element is not just sending them home, because basically you're sending them home by themselves. And if they're having difficulty processing it, you want to send them to somebody that can get them professional help immediately. You don't want to, and so that's why we personally take them. I know that's kind of the extreme side of this, but we put them in our car, take them right to professional agency, and start the process.
The ethos of first responders has traditionally been one of toughness, self-reliance, emotional soundness, and reluctance to question the emotion or behavior of your colleagues. Therefore, stress management through self-care has been the primary focus of organizational efforts to address first responder trauma exposure.
If you are able to handle all of the stress or the sad or the angry moments that happen on the phone calls or on the radio traffic with our units responding that make you concerned about what your future is going to be like.
I've been on the job for a long time, and you end up getting images in your mind or different experiences that you've had over time. So all too often when there are large gatherings of people or my kids asked to do certain things that most parents are probably it's a very easy answer to say yes. All too often I have something in the back of my head that is just a ready-made image of the what could happen.
It is inaccurate to pathologize a normal physical and psychological response to traumatic events that challenge well-established schemas developed over a lifetime. In other words, it is normal to experience emotional and physical distress when witnessing or involved in a traumatic event. This image shows the heart rate of a police officer responding to a domestic violence call. The activation of the sympathetic nervous system can clearly be seen from the time the officer receives the call until 5 to 6 minutes after the abuser has been handcuffed. What this does not show is that this activation is likely to reoccur later that day, the next day when the officer is getting ready for work and putting on the uniform, or well into the future when the officer thinks about or sees something that reminds the officer of the event. Recurrent exposure to traumatic events, which are commonly experienced by first responders, should be seen as an occupational hazard, and therefore treated as such by establishing a culture that supports early identification and management of trauma exposure. Several screening tools, such as, but not limited to, Secondary Traumatic Stress Scale, STS-IOA, PHQ-9, and the CDRISC, can provide meaningful information for monitoring and managing the impact of recurrent trauma exposure. A growing body of literature speaks to the role organizations have in mitigating the risk associated with the exposure to recurrent traumatic events. By doing so, organizations will reduce the burden carried by the individual and promote vicarious resilience, post-traumatic growth, and organizational resilience.
My organization has a critical incident stress management team that's also for a peer support team, as is our fire department, which we're a part of. We monitor and make sure anytime that there's a bad call or just a rough call, or if someone's having just an issue with any call, we check on them. We get the list of everybody involved from police, fire, and dispatchers to make sure everybody gets checked on, and then we try to follow up with them the week after, because sometimes you're fine right away and sometimes later it can affect you more.
Each individual processes it differently. So the number one thing is really that I've had to learn as a leader and as a chief or a chief officer is that I need to listen.
So I think that my department is making pretty significant strides in that. Now, if we see guys that they're starting to show those signs, if they are if they're acting out of character, or we're seeing that they're having trends at home that don't work, our department, our administration has a ton of integrity, and they ask the hard questions, and they care enough to make sure that our guys are taken care of.
Our call to action. Now that you are armed with research-based terminology and common signs associated with the occupational hazard of recurrent trauma exposure, we can together begin to reduce the negative stigma and subsequent physical, psychological, and social symptoms associated with working in such an emotionally demanding occupation. Thanks for all you do to make our lives and communities safer and a better place to live. If you have additional questions regarding information you heard in this video, including the impact of recurrent trauma exposure in your personal, social, family, or occupational life, or how your organization can become trauma-informed, please don't hesitate to reach out.